And we're live. It is Wednesday, February 19th. And the 19th of February is a special day to somebody, just not to me. It is 8 o'clock a.m. It is the year of our Lord, or some of our Lords anyway, 2025. Alicia is drinking out of a The House mug, which I take to be the House of Commons. We are not allowed to have fun anymore. You're not allowed to have fun anymore. But you are watching Dog Shirt TV, which is an effing revolution in morning television. And I want to tell you a little bit more than I told you yesterday about its revolutionary qualities. Because one of the revolutionary qualities is that, I can do it from an airport if I need to. And nobody tells me that my sound was terrible and that I was breaking up the whole time. And I had no idea until it showed up on YouTube, because the content is so much the point on Dog Shirt TV that even when I sound like this, nobody bothers to mention it. They just respond to the points that I'm making. Now, for all I know, the chat yesterday was alive with the sound of people saying, Ben Wittes, your sound sounds awful. We can barely hear you. You're breaking up. Why don't you just shut up and let the other people talk, because we can at least hear them. But no, I wasn't looking at the chat because I was on my phone. Now, while we are on the subject of audio, I received an email from the estimable Laura Donna, CC'd to the estimable John Hawkinson, bringing my attention to a deplorable fact. The fact, as she reports it, is that there are different audio levels between the co-hosts and guests in the live stream. Now, magic causes this problem to go away when we take the video and we make it into a YouTube video or a podcast, because Riverside has this really cool feature where the sound it just equalizes itself, and it's called automatic voice leveling, and the audio levels just magically level. It's done by an AI so that we don't have to employ audio engineers anymore, because we don't want to employ audio engineers, because none of them should ever have jobs, says the new economy, in which except if they're Canadian AI audio engineers, then we charge them a 25% tariff. But American audio can be unemployed for free. And so when we produce this as a podcast or as a YouTube video, the audio leveling issue goes away. But I am told that for those who are watching live on Riverside, there can be rather extreme audio differences between the different people, that Alicia is loud and I am very quiet. And we're trying not to make this about our characters as human beings, as she takes a sip from the house mug. But here's what I'm going to do about it. Today, absolutely nothing, because I'm in a hotel room on a Chromebook, and I got this little tiny mic here, and I don't have my device calibrations. But when I am at home on Friday morning, we're going to do something we've never done before on Dog Shirt TV. We're going to do a little sound check before we get started, and we're just going to make sure.
Your sound's weird.
My sound's weird?
We went down.
That's better now.
What's it doing?
I don't know. You just kind of cut out for a little bit.
I cut out?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Well, all right. So we're going to do a little sound check thingy, and we're going to figure out that we're kind of at the same levels. We're not going to be finicky about it or anything, because this is Dog Shirt TV, and it's a goddamn revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features is that we don't get finicky about things like that. We just kind of iron it out. But another revolutionary feature of Dog Shirt TV is we take listener input seriously. And so when Laura Donna and John Hawkinson write to me and say, hey, you're too quiet, Alicia's very loud, we're going to adjust that to, make sure at least that Alicia isn't very loud. We're just ragging on you because you're here. And so we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to drink coffee out of House of Commons mugs, or in my case, Intercontinental Hotel mugs. And we are allowed to make fun of Alicia. And we are allowed to get listener input on the tech problems, which remain, of course, an integral part of the show. On today's show, we are invading Canada. And we have a Canadian defense analyst who's going to join us, if he does, to discuss Canada's prospects for repelling the invasion. Alicia, what do we know about the status of our guest?
Well, he says he's on there. He must be in the chat.
He must be in the chat. Ooh,
I don't know. So first he was forced to download an app, which is weird because that doesn't happen to me. And then the second thing is he says that he is here. I just sent the link again.
Weird.
Snow is our defense, John Hawkinson. Just try to get up here now.
Yeah, all right. So the first thing we need to do, if you are Murray Brewster, our esteemed guest, and you can hear me, there's some app thing on your app where you can request to speak, and that's you should click that if you see it. Alicia, I am going to assign you to work with the guest to get him visible or audible. Meanwhile, I am going to talk about how an invasion of Canada would actually work, which is a subject about which I know absolutely nothing. So I'm going to just vamp and kind of make it up in while Alicia. Oh, there we go. We have our guest, Murray Brewster.
Hey, Ben, I've been here all along. Okay, I've been listening to all of your audio travails and how Alicia is loud.
Wow.
Okay?
I hear she's loud. Well, she's never loud to me, but
this mug is for Murray because he hosted the show. It's CBC.
Yes. Why, thank you so much. Yes. Yeah.
So
yeah, it was fun. They actually turned me loose every once in a while. So,
Ben,
you had questions.
Alicia,
well, first,
why don't you introduce Murray?
Exactly. Okay, so today, as we mentioned yesterday, we have Murray Brewster, who is Canada's top defense reporter. I've named him that, but I think the country will agree. He's been with CBC for a long time, and he has recently hosted a very famous show in Canada on CBC Radio called The House, in which he was discussing the threat of possible invasion to Canada. I will share that in the chat in a second. And today we are going to pick up on that topic. And I'm excited because Murray's talked to a lot of other experts on this, and he's done a lot of thinking about it. Ben was going to start out with an idea of how he thought we would be invaded, but I think we should let Murray run with it.
No. I was going to do that because we needed to fill airtime while we figured out how to get him on the screen. But
actually, Ben, you know what? I am interested to hear how you think it would go down, because I've got my own theories, and why don't we use that as a launching point?
I will throw out a theory, which is that first of all, it wouldn't go down. The essence of it would be a kind of Austria 36 like threat of overwhelming force, such that there would be a decision to allow it rather than face it, and U.S. I don't even know if U.S. troops would march in, but it would be done on a notionally consensual basis that was in fact as consensual as the money turnover in a bank robbery. But it wouldn't be an invasion in the sense of, Russia invading Ukraine. Am I wrong?
No, I don't think so. I cannot see any type of major military operation taking place, and that's based upon conversations with a number of different experts, like here in Canada and in the States. What we're witnessing right now is um, an opportunistic attempt to either test the expansion of American borders or basically the way I see it is that the strategy here, there's no short-term nor long-term strategy to absorb Canada. But if you kick the door open and something runs out, then you take advantage of it. That seems to be the consensus. So the way that you could potentially see this coming down is through political and economic pressure. And President Trump has already said that he's willing to exert economic pressure to bring Canada into the Union. So what does that look like? We escalate from a trade war to perhaps an economic war that involves embargoes. And one scenario, the Canadian government imposes an oil embargo or a resources embargo on the U.S. That would not sit well with Alberta, as an example. And again, I'm just postulating a theory, a possible scenario. And then Alberta holds a snap sovereignty referendum. There's already a sovereignty movement in Alberta. They hold a snap sovereignty referendum and ask to join the states. So this house of cards begins to collapse because what you see there is Alberta withdrawing its mineral wealth, its economic heft from the Canadian Union, and that has an effect, for example, on other provinces because we have in our federation we have an equalization federal equalization scheme that helps stabilize all of the different provinces. So the Atlantic provinces, for example, ever since Confederation, ever since they stopped not major trading with the United States, but the North-South linkages, the way that they've stayed in the Union has been through equalization payments. So there would be fewer equalization payments. Ottawa would have less fiscal room, less fiscal ability. You could see active movements in other parts of Canada thinking, okay, well, with Alberta gone, what would happen? What would happen to us? You'd see like the fiscal. But it would all be based upon the fiscal capacity of the United States of Canada being diminished, and the withdrawal of Alberta. BC would be geographically isolated. So you would see perhaps that kind of disintegration of the Union. Again, I have to emphasize it's only a theory, but it's something that has been actively discussed among a lot of the national security people that I talk to.
All right, so let me ask you. I saw an Ipsos poll, which I shared on my Substack this morning, and I actually saw because Alicia posted it on Facebook, that showed national Canadian data on things like the desire to join the United States, the desire to, and the numbers were, Alicia expressed dismay that they were as low as they are. They're in the
They were higher than I thought they might be.
Yeah, they're in the 75% range, wanting Canada to not join the United States. Is that number substantially lower, do we know, in Alberta? or do we have reason to think that Alberta is less? I mean, it has a sovereignty movement, it has a Join Texas movement, but has anybody done province-wide polling on those questions in places in Alberta and other places where you might expect there to be a little bit more sympathy for the Trump proposal?
Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge, that kind of deep dive data. Because you see, up until this point, this particular scenario has been completely unthinkable. Completely unthinkable. So I don't know what sort of research would be out there. I'm surprised, and Alicia, I actually asked you to share that poll with me.
I will share the
I got the Ipsos Reid one out. It was just out a couple of days ago. I'll send it to you, Murray. There's some sketchy poll that I don't trust. Also, I've seen recently. Oh my God, why is my brain not working on this? There's a newspaper that's really dodgy, makes a lot of money, right leaning, came from Falun Gong.
the
The Epoch Times.
Thank you. Epoch Times has been trying to run sketchy little polls on Twitter that aren't really reliable. I think we'll get more of that kind of stuff coming out, alas.
But I sort of think, or my expectation is that there's going to be a lot of research in this area, in this country now.
So here is, can you see the poll information that I'm sharing here?
Yep.
So it's pretty strong that Canadians are not excited about becoming the 51st state, as though all of Canada would be one state, along with Wyoming, and Delaware. Maybe these are the kind of numbers that move, but it's hard for me to believe that they would move very much.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, Ben, we've talked. I mean, I've talked about like how, or one of the theories as to how. And I mean, you've got another one, like a very Austria-like scenario. But what we haven't talked about, and what we haven't focused on, and I don't think it's happened on either side of the border, is what would happen afterwards.
Do
And I
we
mean,
get our money converted?
well, my question is, first of all, does the United States have the fiscal capacity to be able to absorb Canada?
Absolutely not.
There you go.
I mean,
it's one of the reasons why, because I mean, the annexation movement was fairly strong following the U.S. Civil War, because the Congress of the day was not very pleased with Britain for its support of the Confederacy, and the only reason, or well, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that Canada exists today as a sovereign nation is because of the threat of annexation by the United States in the mid-19th century. And so back then, they didn't have the fiscal capacity to be able to take over the British colonies. And I don't believe they have the fiscal capacity to take over Canada as it stands right now and absorb it from a social, institutional, political, even resource point of view.
I agree with that. We don't actually have the fiscal capacity to run the United States right now, let alone absorb Canada. But I want to ask another what happens next question, which is, I think let's assume for a minute a non-consensual military, the Trumpiest version of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that what is not true, the premise that is not true of Ukraine, which is that Russia can get into Kiev in 3 days, and but but then you have a major insurgency. Like might actually be true here that, you know, we have this gigantic border. There's no way that Canada can defend that border in a hostile, but it's a, you know, the same reason that the British Empire couldn't hold the United States unwillingly in the 18th century, which is that the landmass is just too damn big and there's too much space for people to go. Is for exactly that reason, holding Canada is a completely untenable proposition. And it's basically the same problem as Napoleon and Hitler had in Russia, only actually a larger, I mean, it's a
Geographic area.
smaller landmass, but the amount of it that you would have to occupy in order to take it is just gigantic. And the capacity of Canadians to retreat north and wage a long campaign, there's just no way we would be able to do that over the long run. I'm curious for your thoughts on the anti-US um, uh, guerrilla campaign over 30 years to sort of drive us out by, you know, 1,000 million paper cuts.
Well, it all comes down to capacity, and it all comes down to willingness. I would suggest to you that if we were talking about, you know, a potential scenario of an insurgency in Canada, yes, yeah, that would be a possibility. I mean, all you have to do is look at the reaction of Canadians. But to have an insurgency, an effective insurgency, you have to be organized. And I would suggest to you that Canadians have a pacifist streak in them that is going to be not very hard to change. It could change very quickly overnight with the United States invasion and military occupation. However, you have to be organized. In this country, we have, first of all, very strict gun laws, and like I was in Ukraine in the run up to the full Russian invasion in 21 and 22, and they were preparing for a guerrilla war. And I talked to some of the people who wrote their national resiliency law, and I mean, like they were actually actively thinking about these things and planning for them and putting all of the pieces in place because they knew it was going to happen. None of that is happening here.
2014 changed a lot for Ukraine. But here's another poll. This is Abacus data. The thing that worries me, and I agree with Murray, is that it's our young people who don't seem to be as against joining the US as, say, people over 55. So would they be willing to stand up? And then the second thing is, although Canadians have had a great record of being strong fighters, I would posit that our country's become quite soft.
Yes, I agree.
So,
I mean, from a societal point of view, yes, we've become quite soft and quite sensitive. So, and that just feeds into what I was suggesting about, you know, the about an insurgency. If there was going to be an insurgency, I do believe that it would take a number of years to coalesce. It would not be like immediate, and it would be centered potentially around Quebec, because Quebec has a unique place within our federation. Its culture, its language, everything's protected. That won't happen in the in a union with the United States.
great fear in Quebec is becoming Louisiana. And I mean, you hear this all the time. And there's no quicker way to become Louisiana than to join the United States.
Yeah. So, but I mean, I would suggest to you that Quebec society is, when pushed, much more militant. And I mean, we have to go back 50 years to the sovereignty movement in Quebec and the FLQ and the terrorist campaign that took place at that time. So if I were to suggest a scenario as to where the insurgency um, would be centered, it would probably be around Quebec.
And
Now,
do you
I
think
mean,
it would be a Quebecois insurgency, as in for
no, Pan
Quebec
Canadian.
independence, or would it be a Canadian
No,
insurgency?
it would be pan Canadian. But I would suggest to you the strongest coalescing around the notion of an insurgency would probably be in Quebec,
Mm-hmm.
because they have so much to lose, so
Okay,
much.
so explain something to me. You know, in the United States, most people, I think, and I have not seen poll data about this, but just socially, my impression is that most Americans don't take this whole thing very seriously. Trump says he wants Greenland. Trump says he wants to annex Gaza. Trump says he wants to annex Canada. And he's said crazy, stupid things like this the first time, and nothing came of any of it, and nothing's going to come of any of it this time. My impression of Canadians is that they take this pretty seriously, and that there's a a non shrugging, joking aspect to this among Canadians. Not merely Alicia, but a lot of Canadians. That there's real sense of threat about this, and I'm wondering why. I mean, on the one hand, we should always take what he says at least semi-seriously, because he's crazy and sometimes he does shit. But on the other hand, he's not going to take over Canada. So resolve this for me.
Okay, so let's break this down. First of all, is he going to take over Canada? In talking to on the House this past weekend, Vince Rigby, our former national security advisor to the Prime Minister, intelligence advisor to the Prime Minister, he said, "Is it a short-term or medium-term goal of Trump? No. Is it something he could potentially accomplish in 4 years? No. Is it a long-term goal? Maybe. But speaking to the scenario that I postulated with Alberta, if we offer ourselves up to the United States, is he going to say no? If he puts enough economic and political pressure and fractures the federation, is he going to say no? Unlikely. So under that particular scenario, I think that we have to take it seriously. But it exposes the weaknesses within our federation, and I think Canadians realize that. I think that's part of the sort of quiet panic, the vapors that we are experiencing. I also think that there's a portion of this where Canadians realize that we have had it very good, and that some of the criticisms that are leveled against Canadians about our ability to defend ourselves, about uh, defense spending, etc. I think Canadians realize and have come to realize, particularly lately, and there is polling data for this, that the criticisms are correct. So we feel vulnerable. So I think that is what is at the heart of the Canadian reaction. I don't know, Alicia, what do you think?
I would agree with all of that. I think we aren't in a, it's okay. It's like having a massively big neighbor on your doorstep. It's really hard, I think, for Americans to understand what it's like to live beside that. and maybe things have been fine.
You guys are the massively big neighbor on our doorstep, not the other way around.
Size wise, but not population wise, not economy wise, not military size wise. Like there's so much that you guys just overshadow us on. And you also, okay, how to put this delicately? Your situation at home seems incredibly volatile right now. It feels like anything could happen. And also we're so intertwined.
Well, and that's the other point that I wanted to make was that, I mean, folks in the States are looking at this going, oh yeah, Trump says all sorts of crazy shit, and no, it's never going to happen. Okay. These are the same people that said that Donald Trump would never be elected in 2016. These are the same people who said that January 6th was an absolute political career killer for Donald Trump. They've been wrong. And I think while Canadians are very, very aware of what takes place in the United States. They follow U.S. politics. They follow, trends and everything in the U.S. Because, I mean, again, you're the giant neighbor, to the south of us. And I think that a lot of Canadians are a little skeptical of how easily Trump is dismissed.
Well, that is as one of the people who has consistently warned not to dismiss Trump. I share that sense. And, I have always been one of the people who says take this problem seriously. And so I do not begrudge Canadians taking the problem seriously. I do think there's a weird quality of dealing with Trump, and I say that as somebody who's had to do it at a very personal level at some different times, though not recently. But I'm closer to the game in some ways than a lot of people are. And one of the weird things about him is that so much of what he says is errant nonsense that has no bearing on reality. And yet, it's probably like 90% of the words that come out of his mouth you can ignore safely. But you never know which the 10% are that you can't. And so, when you say, okay, he's not going to invade Greenland, he's not going to take over Gaza, he's not going to take over Canada, he's not going to do X, Y, and Z, you're going to be wrong about one of them. And so which one you'll never know. And then all of a sudden, we're in Gaza, but the rest, of course, has no, you're right about. And so, not you, but one. And so there's your point that the same people are saying this who said all kinds of other things that didn't turn out to be true is exactly right. There's a margin of error built into our dismissal of things related to Trump, mostly involving his own capacity, but sometimes involving his intent. So, for example, how many people didn't believe he was really going to try to fire, 10% of the federal government, right? Like, I think a lot of people didn't believe that. It wasn't that he wasn't clear about it. They said they were going to have Doge and it was going to cut $2 trillion from the federal budget, right? Well, and there is a little bit like, we were talking yesterday with, a shocked European who acknowledged, hey, Europeans who were shocked as I am haven't been listening to him. And that's right. And so you kind of get it both ways, right? If you listen and you take it seriously, then most of the time you're kind of end up being the fool who cried wolf, because most of the time he's just talking out of his ass. But if you don't listen and take it seriously, then if you're the 1 in 10 times, the 2 in 5, the X% of the time that he turns out to be serious about it and have the follow through, then you're the person who, didn't listen when the sky really was falling. And so it's a total no-win situation, and it applies domestically as well as in the foreign affairs space.
Well, I mean, in terms of Canadians, I actually see. I'm the kind of person that always looks for the silver lining, the positive. And if there is one thing positive that's coming out of all of this annexation debate, is that we Canadians are rediscovering our sense of nationhood, which has been, as far as I'm concerned, in decline for the better part of the last 20 years. And I mean, there's a running gag that some of us who have been around a long time will, we look around Ottawa. Ottawa, in many respects, like Washington, it takes an awful long time to get stuff done. It really does. And, if you look at some of the, for example, like some of the symbols of our national pride, our national power, our parliament, as an example, the center block, it has been closed since 2017 for renovations, and it will not reopen until 2032, at least 2032. And it is because there is this absolutely opaque process that has been, the bureaucrats run everything, and, et cetera. And like, we also cannot agree on where our prime minister should live. The prime minister's residence has been vacant ever since Justin Trudeau moved in, almost 10 years, because it's condemned, it's old, it needs, but nobody wants to spend the political capital to revitalize it. We've not been taking our symbols of nationhood seriously, and this is not just because of the current administration. This extends back, and I think that what Trump's annexation threats are doing is reinstilling a sense of nationhood, forcing Canadians to look at themselves and see themselves as different than Americans and proud of that. And this also extends back to our insurgency discussion, because I think that still has to gestate. It has to form even more before Canadians really get angry about stuff.
I would add to that I question how our education system has helped or not helped. My understanding, at least in our province in Ontario, is that civics class, which used to only be a semester in high school, has been reduced to half a semester in some cases. So people are really far removed from understanding how government works, how it impacts our life. We're very remote from all of these things. In terms of the insurgency, one thing that's kind of stands out to me that worries me a bit is that another demographic that I think would have, under normal circumstances, been a core constituent for that, which would be the hunting rural young male demographic in Canada, is unfortunately, I think, leaning more towards conservatives and also pro-America. So I think it would take quite a bit for them to shift. So nothing short of an invasion. And then there's a third thing, Murray, that's been going through my head. I don't know if they still teach this as much, but when I was coming up through school, Manifest Destiny was very much taught to us. And we were told about past perils with the US and American aggrandizement, taking over other territory, etc., that I think maybe for our generation and older is still very much etched, but might not be for younger ones.
Oh, I agree. I mean, it's history, be it Canadian history, be it global history, has not been properly taught in our education system for the better part of a generation. And I mean, the best example I can give you does not relate necessarily to Canada, but I was following the Prime Minister around during the in the aftermath of Russia's full invasion. So he did a tour of London, he did a tour of Riga, he did a tour of Berlin, and he did a tour of Warsaw, all these different Allied capitals. And I had a conversation with some of his senior staff. At the end of the trip, they always pop into the media room, take the temperature of the media room, see if we're cranky about anything. And they also just come to have a glass of wine and just chat. But there was a really fascinating conversation because one of the senior staff in the Prime Minister's office was saying to me how they were setting up for an event with the Prime Minister, and they had like this individual, very senior, had to intervene because the backdrop that was being set up was on the edge of the old Warsaw Ghetto. The junior staff that was running this event did not know about the Warsaw Ghetto, did not know what had taken place there. And like the senior staffer was absolutely floored by it. And so she looked at me and said, like, what do you think? Because we're sort of contemporaries. She's a few years younger than me, but I said, that's a very interesting question. So I always have Sunday dinner with my kids. I have kids in their 30s, mid to late 30s now, and they come in, and I figured I'm going to ask them. Do you know the significance of the Warsaw? Do you know what happened in the Warsaw Ghetto? Do you know the significance of it? Both of my kids are history majors. They didn't know.
And what didn't they know?
They did not know. They had only vaguely heard about it.
Interesting.
Vaguely heard about it. So the failure of our education system in this country, okay, has been where history and the teaching of history, be it Canadian or world history, has been profound.
Yeah, well, that's true here too, although I think the U.S. education system is so fractured that because there aren't, sort of like, there's nothing equivalent to a province-wide curriculum, that, the scatter is probably greater in the United States than in Canada, just because of the extremity of the diversity. But I'm sure the average is worse. But I want to ask a weird question, which I think underlies some of this, which is that Canadians and U.S. nationals interact all the time. And people, there are no Canadians who don't know Americans and vice versa. And there's sort of the person to person relations are so neighborly and so warm that you, particularly on the American side, forget that you're not nationals of the same country.
Mm-hmm.
But Americans and Canadians almost never interact in their capacities as nationals of separate countries. So like there isn't a like come learn about Canada as a country program the way, if you're, say, an American Jew, there's the birthright trip, right? Like we actually don't interact with one another as though we're different. We interact with one another as though we're there's an awareness that they're different countries, but that's kind of it. And I'm wondering if that's a cultural mistake, that there's that like, for Donald Trump to say we want to annex Canada should be as ridiculous as to say we want to annex Mexico. And it's not. And the reason it's not is because of a sense of cultural proximity, right? Because of a linguistic proximity, because of a similar standard of living and style of life. And I'm wondering if, like, that, there's a and by the way, no offense, but when Canadians emphasize the differences, it always comes off as to us as a little bit precious, like, um, you know, um,
We are.
I mean, look, I'm just saying, and and
Funnier.
you are funnier. You're more passive aggressive. There's, you know, look, I love Canada. I love Canada free and independent. I have no imperial ambitions on Canada. But I do think that there's that when you have to kind of constantly emphasize we're not American, we're Canadian, that there's an underlying cultural anxiety there that you're that there's and I do think that there's some dialogue that has never I don't mean like what the Europeans do, the sort of transatlantic dialogue nonsense, a whole bunch of conferences where you say the word transatlantic dialogue as often as possible, but I do think there's some cultural work that just hasn't been done to to teach Canadian. You're describing to teach Canadians about what the different, what their history is, but also to teach Americans, like, hey, like the fact that we sound very similar, and speak a similar, the same language, does not actually mean we're the same people. And I don't know how you do that, but it does strike me as like something that's really important.
Yes, it is. I mean, you've actually touched on the major social issue between our two nations, and how you untangle that, and how Canadians impress upon themselves and impress upon Americans, and how Americans impress upon themselves that we are different, is almost impossible, because of the shared language, because of the shared culture, but also because of the fact, I mean, you're looking at somebody whose father was American, whose grandmother was American, who a quarter of my family are American, because I grew up in the border area. I grew up in the Niagara region. And so it's going to be, and it's almost an impossible task to differentiate us socially from one another. I mean, and particularly because we are so inundated with American culture. But I think when it comes down to where progress can be made, at least among Canadians, not among Americans, is in the sense of nationhood, in the sense of we have a different lifestyle than folks in the States. And I think that it's those areas that are going to have to be emphasized to Canadians to reinforce their sense of identity. And I say, like, we have a different series of laws, much more
Privacy law.
We have a privacy law, but we have gun control. Okay, we have gun control, and I think that most Canadians don't necessarily appreciate that until they see what happens on a regular basis in the States. This is one of those well-worn paths, but we have universal health care. And I think that, as painful as it can be sometimes with some of the waiting lists and everything else, I think that Canadians generally do appreciate that. So And the thought that we would be potentially losing that is something that would galvanize a lot of people and help reinforce our sense of national identity. But when it comes to like to social aspects and our similarities with Americans, no, we I can't see us disentangling it. There's just too much social history there.
All right, so I want to actually, to the Americans in the audience, I want to make a recommendation, which had a profound impact on me when I did it the first time, and I do it regularly now. So there is a Canadian election coming up. I don't think we know exactly when yet, but
sometime this spring, Ben.
Sometime.
Do you think it's going to happen this spring?
Definitely. Yeah.
There will be a Canadian election, and I want you all to watch the CBC election night coverage of the returns coming in. Because if you ever want to doubt that there is a deeply different political culture in Canada, watch an election night. It looks completely different from an election night in the United States. It's riding by riding in these tiny little hamlets in, from the maritime provinces to BC. It is, the districts are much, much smaller than in the United States. The party system is completely different. And you will see an intimacy of politics that is completely unlike anything. And this is on the national, the equivalent of watching CNN. You will see an intimacy of politics that you simply cannot see ever at the federal level in the United States. And that is a window into a completely different political culture that we have almost no visibility on.
And that's actually something I didn't touch on in my earlier response to you, is because yes, we have a different political culture, but we in this country are still feeling the effects of polarization. And while it's not a conversation, I don't think that would reinforce Canadian nationalism.
Sorry, go ahead, Alicia.
Well, I mean, I think this is the elephant in the room, is that we only really seem to become more Canadian when we're told we're American. And we have to have some sort of broader conversation to come up with, I think, some sort of Canadian identity, especially one that's capable of accommodating the diversity that the country has now. And I think partly this has to draw on history, because Canada has made different choices from the US that has set it apart, that has caused us to have some cultural differences. I also think we probably need to have more coverage of problems within the American system, because one thing that I fear is healthcare. There has been a strong rhetoric lately coming from politicians and others that we should have this kind of semi-private or moving towards a private care system. And I don't think Canadians really appreciate how hard that is to live with and how bad that would be. There is kind of an idea that I think has permeated us from an American perspective, which is this pull yourself up from your bootstraps and I've got enough to be able to do it. And I don't think most people realize what the cost of that is. So I think on one hand, we watch the politics, but we're not actually watching it as deeply as we should. We're not seeing the experiences of average Americans quite well enough. And at the same time, we need to figure out who the heck we are, what we want to be, and where we want to go.
But the other thing, the healthcare example is a really interesting one, because I think for a lot of Canadians, or at least wealthier Canadians, there is a attraction to the speed and fee-for-service components of the U.S. system as a stopgap against the waiting lists, and so whichever, if you live in the United States and you're interested in problems like equity or universality, the Canadian system looks really attractive. And and access. And if you're looking from a Canadian perspective and you're frustrated by the speed at which you can get blah, 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 there's something very attractive about, driving over the border and getting it in Seattle or, New York. And I do think again, the cultural proximity is such that we can each see in each other what our political system is failing to deliver for us, and then ignore the things that are being delivered on the other side of the border, but not on our side.
No, I agree completely.
So I would be remiss if I didn't ask you in the 5 minutes we have remaining, how this is affecting the Canadian political discussion in the run-up to the election. The last time we talked Canadian politics on the show, we assumed the Liberals were dead men walking or dead women walking. And all of a sudden, Trump seems like the biggest gift to them that America could give. Has he given the Liberals a new lease on life?
It has completely upended the political narrative and changed the ballot box question when the election will take place. Because up until these annexation threats, the ballot box question was being driven by the conservative opposition, which had a very, very healthy lead in the polls and continues to have a lead at the moment. But that lead has been cut. The ballot box question revolved around taxes, the carbon tax that we have in this country, and what to do with it in taxation. And whereas the ballot box question now is going to be who is best to deal with and to stand up to Donald Trump, which political leader is going to be the best. And it is affecting the it's affecting the Liberal leadership contest, the contest to replace Justin Trudeau, but it will dominate the election campaign. And this is why you see the polls tightening. Now, I mean, you have and the polls are tightening because the perceived front runner is former Bank of Canada, former Bank of England governor Mark Carney, and he presents himself very well. He has a wealth of experience, and that stands in contrast to the current opposition leader, who has the Conservatives have had a problem pivoting away from their battle plan, their election battle plan. And so it's going to be a very, very interesting spring and interesting contest.
And what do we make of Carney as a potential interlocutor for Trump if we assume that either Carney or Pierre Poilievre is likely to be the next prime minister, and their principal job is going to be maintaining the health and independence of Canada in relation to the United States? How do they stack up as leaders for that purpose?
Well, it's going to be interesting. Where Mark Carney is concerned, I honestly have to say that the jury is still out, me as a reporter, because Mr. Carney has done very few Canadian national media interviews. He's mostly talked to American audiences, including The Daily Show. And so it's hard for me to get a complete assessment. I know his record. I know, I know his impressive resume, and I know what the conservative government of the day was saying about him as they were navigating the financial crisis of 2008. So I know all of these things. I think that he would be, in dealing with President Trump, unflappable. Whether whether he is going to be able to manage the onslaught of crises remains to be seen, as far as I'm concerned. Mr. Poilievre, he is a seasoned politician, and to this point, and this is not necessarily criticism because I understand the political strategy behind it, but to this point, his party has been very good about slogans and very good about the politics. What I've been waiting to see from the Conservatives is policy. And normally parties do not put their policy, in this country at least, they don't put their policy in the window until we're in the middle of an election campaign and you're able to analyze it. So I mean, this is not meant as like, yeah, what I'm saying is not meant as criticism. So
we have dispensed with policy entirely in the country.
I was going to say you're lucky if you get that.
Yeah, exactly. We just do the slogans are the policy.
Yeah, and I mean, and I'm really hoping that that's not the case with the Conservatives, because this country does need a viable alternative. It needs a healthy debate about our future, particularly at this time.
We are going to leave it there. Murray Brewster, come back anytime. I would love to have you back. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Ben, thanks for inviting me. And you know what? This has been a gas. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, please, reach out anytime. I'm happy to chat with you.
Well, we have two Canadian co-hosts where Canadians are, and they are not here in their capacity as pretending to be Americans. They are here in their capacity as proud, independent Canadians.
No, I never pretended to be American, ever.
Take the win. I'm saying you're a proud, independent Canadian every time you're here. What's the problem? We're going to be back tomorrow. I don't remember whether we have a guest scheduled or
not.
Yes,
you do.
We do?
Yes, you do. It's Anna Mills, I think, maybe. Or maybe not confirmed. I'm not sure. We
may have Anna Mills coming tomorrow. We may not. But we're going to be here. I'm going to be in this hotel room. You're going to be wherever you are. It's great to see you all. Have a great day.
Take care.